opium and heroin is being produced.
The military was deeply involved, along with, of course, the CIA, along with the BCCI Bank, Bank of Credit and Commerce International. And then Dubai became the laundry for this area, which they began to call the Golden Crescent, which is Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And Dubai became the place where the drug money was laundered. And lo and behold, it's the same banks involved, HSBC Bank, the second biggest bank in the world, Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation. Now they want you to know them as HSBC because they don't really want you to understand the history. Because of course this bank was also involved with the Chinese Opium Wars way back in the 1800s when the British first went into China and did the Opium Wars against the Chinese. So HSBC set up in Dubai along with Standard & Chartered Bank, the other big Hong Kong bank. And now all this Golden Crescent drug money that's being trafficked behind the scenes of another big war, covert operation, is being laundered through Dubai.
The CIA has been accused of money laundering drug funds via the BCCI. The former U.S. Commissioner of Customs William von Braun said that when customs agents raided the bank in 1988, they found numerous CIA accounts. The CIA also worked with BCCI, arming and financing the Afghan Mujahideen during the Afghan war against the Soviet Union, using BCCI to launder proceeds from trafficking heroin grown in the Pakistan-Afghanistan borderlands, boosting the flow of narcotics to European and U.S. markets.
In the Afghanistan case, the Mujahideen, who were there fighting the Soviet Union Red Army in Afghanistan, the major source of funding, aside from money provided by the U.S. Congress and by Saudi Arabia, were the proceeds of the heroin and opium trade.
Back in 2000, the Taliban issued a fatwa banning poppy cultivation in Afghanistan, slashing the cultivation and production of opium and heroin, the whereabouts of zero. Only about 12 acres of land were under cultivation. A year later, he was forced to invade Afghanistan to find Osama bin Laden. What happens is we have poppy cultivation surging back up much higher than pre-occupation levels, right on the boots of tens of thousands of U.S.-led forces in Afghanistan. Today, Afghanistan stands as the #1 producer and exporter of heroin. About 90% of the world's heroin comes from Afghanistan.
The Taliban did issue a fatwa against poppy production and heroin trafficking, had kind of cleaned that country up, even though the Taliban were put into power with the blessing of big oil and government of Dubai, government of Saudi Arabia, and the CIA, and all these people. But they did. That was the one thing that, one of the reasons we took the Taliban out was the fact that they issued this fatwa against heroin trafficking, and that's a big money maker for these people.
And one of the main reasons that Washington targeted the Taliban for removal was when they were in power, they practically eradicated the opium trade. This was a cardinal sin for Washington. It wanted it reactivated. It got rid of it, the Taliban. Opium production boomed. And at least 1 or 2 years in the new millennium, 1 or 2 UN reports, maybe even more than that, said that of the world's global opium production, Afghanistan supplied more than 100% of it. Currently, it's somewhere on the order of over 90%.
In the run-up to the Communist Revolution in China, in order to provide covert funds for the Kuomintang forces loyal to General Chiang Kai-shek, who were fighting the Chinese communists under Mao Zedong, the CIA helped the KMT smuggle opium from China and Burma to Bangkok in Thailand by providing airplanes owned by one of their front businesses, Air America. Released in April 13, 1989, the Kerry Committee report concluded that members of the U.S. State Department who provided support for the Contras were involved in drug trafficking, and elements of the Contras themselves knowingly received financial and material assistance from drug traffickers.
What Senator Kerry's investigators discovered was that a major source of funding for the Contras in Nicaragua was the fact that there were cocaine traffickers on the payroll of the White House. It was actually not so much the CIA as this White House-based operation associated with then Vice President George Bush, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who was the White House point person for all of the Contra dealings. And there were shiploads and plane loads of cocaine being smuggled into the United States, especially to be converted into crack cocaine to sell in the American ghettos. And those funds were being used to finance the Contras.
In Mexico, according to Peter Dale Scott, the Dirección Federal de Seguridad was in part a CIA creation, and the CIA's closest government allies were for years in the DFS. The DFS badges handed out to top-level Mexican drug traffickers have been labeled by Drug Enforcement Administration agents as a virtual license to traffic. Scott says that the Guadalajara cartel, Mexico's most powerful drug trafficking network in the early 1980s, prospered largely because it enjoyed the protection of the DFS under its chief Miguel Nazario, a CIA asset.
You also have Operation Fast and Furious, where the Obama administration laundered illegal weapons from the United States into the hands of Mexican drug cartels. And we know that a number of American drug enforcement agents, customs officials, were assassinated using weapons that were given from the Obama administration to top people in the most deadly Mexican drug cartels. This is a shameful episode. Congress found Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt of Congress for refusing to provide the documentation on this filthy Operation Fast and Furious, in which guns were given to killer drug cartels.
In 1989, the United States invaded Panama as part of Operation Just Cause, which involved 25,000 American troops. General Manuel Noriega, head of the government of Panama, had been giving military assistance to Contra groups in Nicaragua at the request of the U.S., which in exchange allowed him to continue his drug trafficking activities, which they had known about since the 1960s.
So I think that, yes, there's been a historical involvement. Back in Vietnam, it was notorious that Air America, a CIA front company, was funneling heroin around the globe to generate revenue to keep the war going. This was a British policy that certain intelligence and Wall Street financial interests inherited from the British and have been pursuing as a British policy line going back to the Opium War.
Ultimately, the City of London runs the whole thing because the City of London is totally deregulated. There's no regulations, there's no financial regulations. Like even on Wall Street, it's been deregulated a lot, but there's no regulation in the City of London. And then you have this series of offshore British protectorates where there's offshore banking, Cayman Islands, Bahamas, Bermuda, Isle of Man, Isle of Jersey, these kinds of places where there's just no transparency. So what happens is all this drug money goes through these big British banks. HSBC has locations everywhere. Standard & Chartered is another huge bank that's involved with this. And so basically you have oil money coming in from Saudi Arabia. You have arms money coming in from the CIA and the military contractors and shady defense deals with different countries. And you have all this drug money. And that's what my book, Big Oil and Their Bankers, is about. It's about the world's three most valuable commodities, which is guns, drugs, guns, drugs, and oil. And then these things all mingle together, and they call it the Eurodollar, the Eurodollar market, because the Eurodollar, all a Eurodollar is any currency that's traded in a country other than its own. So when a dollar is traded in Britain, it becomes a Eurodollar. When a pound's traded in Panama, it becomes a Eurodollar. So there's this huge Eurodollar market it's nothing but dirty money.
Before the first plane ever even hit the first tower on 9/11, a massive U.S., British, and NATO troop buildup was already organized and positioned for an attack on Israel's enemies, opium-rich Afghanistan and oil-rich Iraq.
And there's an old poster out west, as I recall, that said "Wanted." dead or alive.
With no solid proof of who was responsible for 9/11, George Bush Jr. attacked the poverty-stricken, war-ravaged country of Afghanistan only 4 weeks after 9/11. The U.S. and British military dropped 12,000 bombs on thousands of buildings and homes, pounding them into dust and rubble and killing 8,000 Afghan people. 20,000 more people died from war-related cold, starvation, and disease. Nobody made a big-budget TV production out of the massacre with a God Bless Afghanistan movie score. The U.S.-British war on Afghanistan left behind millions of starving people and thousands of women who are still veiled, still homeless, and still penniless.
دې علت دا ده چې 14 کاله دلته جنګ تیر شوی، زراعت تباه شوی، شفاخانې تباه شوي، تجارت تباه شوی، تعلیمي ادارې تباه شوي، مکتبونه تباه شوي، سړکونه تباه دي، ولږه ده، فقر ده، خلک بله چاره نه لري څه وکړي.
There can never be peace and democracy in Afghanistan. Why? Because peace and democracy would expose and cut off corporate America's opium and heroin trade at the source. So what was the payoff for the U.S.-British war on Afghanistan? 1, the uncooperative Taliban warlords got kicked out and replaced by the cooperative Northern Alliance warlords. 2, opium and heroin production and revenues skyrocketed. 3, Afghanistan got a new leader named Hamid Karzai, who just happens to be an ex-employee of Unocal Oil. 3, America got permission to build their oil and gas pipeline through Afghanistan.
The international financial system at the very top, the 5 or 6 biggest American banks, J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and all of the City of London-centered banks, plus the banks that operate in offshore safe havens, like the Cayman Islands, like the Jersey and Guernsey Islands right there in the United Kingdom. All of these centers thrive on their ability to launder criminal money into the mainstream of the world banking system through all of the key world banking capitals, Dubai, Qatar, Doha and Qatar. These are also now emerging as major offshore banking centers, so that you've got a global structure, top down, that allows this criminal enterprise to kill millions and millions of people by drug addiction and by drug